what I want to do now is start moving out from and branching away from that core dominant notion of autonomy. I think that we actually conflate a wide variety of notions under the heading of autonomy. There's many really completely distinct things that get folded together. And they're all important, and they can all come apart from one another, and they can, in fact, all often be in tension with one another. Protecting one of them might come at the cost of protecting another. And if that's right, then there's no thing which is the unified thing, protecting autonomy, right? These words that I have up here are my names for the different strands. I hope they map roughly onto our natural language use of those terms, but I'm going to be making these terms more precise for my own purposes in the context of this talk. All of these terms are terms that get used themselves in conflicting, complicated, multiple ways, right? So our use of each of these terms in everyday life is itself messy, but I'm just going to, for our purposes, neaten them up and use them as labels for several different distinct notions. So I think that autonomy breaks at least into liberty, self-determination, integrity, independence, and agency. And one of the things we're going to see is that once we attend to these 5 different dimensions, there's lots of parts of autonomy that are not in any way about making free, informed choices or even about that context of choice while sitting in a clinic at all. So let's talk about liberty first. Philosophers also like to call this negative freedom or negative autonomy. Negative there not in the sense of bad or icky, but in a sense that I'll describe in a moment. By liberty, I simply mean something like the freedom to choose without anybody getting in your way, right? The freedom to do what you want without anybody stopping you, either by physically coercing you or by manipulating you. Right? So it's basically freedom as non-interference. That's where the negative comes from. It's the freedom in the sense of not anything blocking you. Okay, does that make sense? If all you've got is liberty, that doesn't say anything yet about what you can do. It just says what nobody's going to stop you from doing, right? In the legal context, there's an important distinction between, for example, rights to some kind of positive support and mere non-interference rights, right? Laws that say, well, you just can't get in somebody's way if they try to do this. And it's that latter that I'm counting as liberty. Now, I think at times, not typically, because the dominant model includes more than just liberty, but at times in our bioethical discussions and debates, we do sometimes act as if liberty or negative freedom is the only thing that we're aiming at. And you get really weird effects that we'll see if you overemphasize liberty at the cost of the various other kinds of autonomy. I think that if you treat liberty for patients as the main thing that you're trying to protect when you respect autonomy, you tend to get something like what I've called here the consumer model of healthcare. You get this idea that what it means to protect autonomy is to let patients pick whatever medical interventions they want, right? And to have doctors and other healthcare professionals serve as kind of skilled technicians for hire whose job it is to just give patients what they choose to have rather than to play any shaping role in what they want, right? So the idea is just don't get in, we want to protect autonomy, so we just can't get in the way of the patient's choices. I heard a debate several years ago, a very impassioned debate that struck me as just really encapsulating this, about ear infections and antibiotics. And it became clear that in almost all cases, giving parents antibiotics for their kids' ear infections did somewhere between nothing and harm, right? Because it produced resistance to the antibiotics and didn't in any way cure the ear infections. And yet, parents often want antibiotics for their kids because they've grown up in an era where they think that's what they're supposed to get and they want to give their kids something, right? And the debate that these doctors were having was not the one that I would have expected, which is it okay to give the parents these antibiotics even if they're not going to do any good? It was, do they have a duty to give the parents the antibiotics, even if they're not going to do any good? And several of the doctors were defending the idea that if the patients wanted these antibiotics and you didn't give them to them, then you weren't respecting their autonomy. right? Never mind the fact that it was a neutral or harmful treatment. That the doctor's job in protecting autonomy is just to not get in the patient's way. In this case, it wasn't really the patient, it was the parent of the patient, but you can make the analogy closely enough, right? So that's overemphasis on liberty gone wild. I also think that this is leaving the healthcare domain, sort of leaving the healthcare domain, it's public health, for a moment. As you all know, there have been a lot of debates over the past year over new rules in New York City, in particular over restricting soda sizes and things like that, right? The new rules over how big of a soda pop you can sell somebody. And I've heard again and again this claim that the mayor has taken away people's autonomy. And the idea that what your autonomy consists in is nobody getting in your way of soda size choices strikes me as an emphasis on liberty gone wild. Now, I think whether those are good laws or not is a complicated question. I'm not saying they're obviously good laws or whatever. There's a lot of interesting public health issues that we can bring in there. But the idea that that's what your liberty is nobody controlling your soda size choices, strikes me as that's what your autonomy is, strikes me as an excellent example of privileging liberty over everything else. Okay, so that's liberty. So this is the only one that's what I call negative autonomy, or non-interference. The thing is, though, that negative autonomy on its own, liberty on its own, really, if that's literally all you've got nothing. I mean that in the most literal sense. The autonomy that we actually care about includes both negative freedom, or liberty, and also positive freedom or autonomy, namely the positive power to act. And I would say, and this is a vague phrase that we'll have to fill out, but not only the power to act, but to act as yourself. Okay? I hope that has some intuitive grab. If you literally only had liberty and you had no positive autonomy, you would just be a lump, right? I mean, there's a sense in which this stool here has perfect liberty. Nobody's stopping it from doing anything it wants to do, right? Its problem is it has no desires or skills or capacities of any kind. It has no positive power to act, so its negative liberty is useless to it. And if you literally only had negative liberty, you would be in the same situation. The only reason that your liberty is at all interesting is because you also have things like options and desires and capacities to exercise those options, right? And that requires positive autonomy, the ability to do things and to choose among things. So unless we have access to decent choices, and unless we have the skills to make those choices and act on them, and crucially, and I'll talk about this a lot, the support needed to actually be able to make those choices and use those skills, your liberty is not so helpful. Now, there's going to be a whole bunch of forms of positive autonomy that I'm about to talk about. It's not just one thing. It's going to fragment into 4 different things. But one of the things that I'm going to claim throughout this talk is that positive autonomy in all of its forms requires not just some sort of internal inherent capacities, but also what I'm going to call scaffolding. That is to say, all of these different kinds of positive autonomy can only exist, not just depending on what's going on inside your body and brain, but when you have the social and material support and resources needed to actually take up options, exercise your skills, and do things. Okay? So let me just give you one example. Think about your choice to go on a diet. Let's say you make a decision to go on a diet, right? So this is something that you have chosen to do, and let's assume that you have liberty. Nobody is going to hold you down and shove donuts down your throat or anything like that, right? Nobody's going to physically stop you from going on a diet. Now, what does it take to stick to that diet, to actually see it through to the end for, say, 6 months or whatever, or a lifetime, right? When we talk about this informally, we tend to talk overwhelmingly about willpower, right? Sticking to a diet takes willpower, where we vaguely conceive of willpower as something in us that some people have a lot of and some people have a little of, right? Some kind of innate capacity that some people were lucky to have lots of and some people were not. And to some extent, that may well be right. Some people may have more willpower than others. But there's a huge amount of stuff that it takes to stick to a diet that is about the social scaffolding and not about whatever's going on inside your will, whatever that means. So for example, how well you can stick to a diet depends on things like where you live and what food stores and options are available where you live, right? Do you have good quality, healthy food available to you? Do you have basic nutritional knowledge? It's amazing the extent to which people will do things that they think count as dieting that in fact are harmful and not going to help them lose weight. What's your work schedule? If you work 2 long shifts and by the time you get off, the only thing that's open is the 7-Eleven and the drive-through McDonald's, that makes it much more difficult to stick to a diet. There are economic constraints, right? Do you have the money to buy good quality food, to buy a gym membership, whatever it may be? There are cultural food traditions that different people are embedded in. If you are in a cultural and family context where you have a lot of rituals and traditions involving high-calorie, high-fat food, it's a whole different kind of project to absent yourself from that, right, and eat differently than if you're not embedded in that. What about the demands of other friends and family members, right? Do you have a husband at home who's expecting a meat and potatoes meal on the table by 7 every day, right? It depends on urban geography. Do you live in a place where you have to drive to everything, or can you walk to things? And so on and so on. All of those things are the scaffolding that provably make a world of difference between who can actually stick to a diet and who can't. So positive autonomy, the ability to actually sort of resolutely make a choice and exercise your skills and stick to it and see it through, and that, like I said, that's going to break into many parts, that requires an enormous amount of social scaffolding and is not just about what skills you have inside.